Thank you. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:18 PM. I apologize for running over in our closed session, but we'll now take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon?
Here.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Mr. Escobedo?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I don't think we have any students here helping with our media, and we do not have any recognition tonight. So we will move on then to petitions and communications portions of our meeting, where we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special board meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communications portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. Board will not respond to comments at this time. If it's appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meeting in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or to discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. I will call 2 names at once. I think we only have 2 speakers tonight. And I remind you that our clock on the wall will help you with your 2 minutes. We thank you for your interest and your cooperation with our guidelines. Our first speaker tonight is Ricky Naylor, to be followed by Reverend Derek Shelby. Mr. Naylor. Thank you.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay. After going around to a lot of different meetings and stuff, over this town and different organizations that are concerned about what's going on with the school district, what we really been finding is that it's just, if you guys don't deal with this race issue, it just seems like it just gets in the way of everything else. I mean, even if it's still not going on, then you need to ask yourself the question then, why is the effects lagging so long after everything's been addressed? You still have things that are not being resolved. So what we propose is you guys need to hire a chief diversity officer, not nobody from the school district, but get somebody from the outside to come in here and make sure that these hiring practices, up to code. There's no shenanigans going on. And also, this board needs to pay more attention to risk factors and oversight. It's not happening. And at the same time, when you do have, black leaders in this school district, they are not really looked upon as leaders in the community out there. So we need to address that. And at the same time, if you always study getting hammered all the time about race issues, to me, you would think that at some point, so you know what, we need more diversity. It'll go in real quick. Once you start hiring more people of color, it'll go in real quick, and you're not doing that. So you need to do that. I mean, we know that people get real uncomfortable talking about race, but I mean, if you don't talk about it, how you going to solve it? If you don't talk about it, it's just going to stay there, sweep on the rug. And somebody said today, somebody had a nice quote today, it says, fear is a great first step. So if you guys are afraid to talk about that, just say, you know what, we are afraid to talk about race, and that's okay, because that's the first step to really dealing with it. Now, like I said, we got all kind of stuff that we've collected. If you guys really want to talk about it, we're going to need more than 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Naylor. Reverend Derek Shelby.
St. Matthew chapter 13, verse 41 and 42. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, And they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. They had the meeting down there at the school. Segregated, talking about race. The editor of the newspaper, one of the most powerful men in this area, and the leaders of the school district don't show up. Talking about a race problem in the school district, and the leaders of the school district don't show up. Raping our kids, and they don't show up. Then everybody's mad at me. Some of y'all going to hell. You're going to hell. You got to meet the Lord Jesus. Them 58 people woke up that morning. They didn't know they was going to die that day. By the devil. I ain't heard one person say the devil was in that man. And half of them went to heaven, and half of them went to hell. You cannot be evil and meet the Lord Jesus Christ. He's going to separate you like the sheep from the goats. If nothing in this life is worth going to hell for. Nothing. There's a lot of filthy white men in Rockford going to hell. They're going to hell. All this evil that they're doing in the school district against these black kids is on purpose. They're segregating the schools on purpose. Thank the Lord Jesus for his blood.
Thank you. We appreciate your interest and your cooperation with our guidelines. Are there any board member comments at this time? Mr. Siegel.
On a bit of good news, one of the action items tonight is going to be a vote that we will cast. I'm confident it'll be in the affirmative for an outside group to come in and give the district some guidance on cultural competency. The group, I believe, is from Oakland, called the National Equity Project, is going to be coming in and providing guidance and instruction at all levels, even up to the board. So that should be good news for those folks who are concerned about the district adopting and learning more about cultural competency.
Okay, any other board member comments? Thank you. If not, we'll now move on to the consent portion of our agenda, including the meeting minutes of September 23rd and September 26, 2017. The 23rd was our strategic planning meeting. The payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, contracts under 10,000, construction bid request log and travel, the bid recommendations for tire service for transportation and operations, the replacement bids for school bus engines, the recurring contracts of E-rate management and consulting, recurring service agreement with Rockford Park District for after-school services, other consent items including the memorandum of understanding for the early adoption innovation plan and the freedom of information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Dixon. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration?
7D.
Mr. Siegel wants 7D pulled. Mr. Rollins?
10A.
10A, okay.
7B.
Okay, Mr. Escobedo, 7B. Okay. Any others? If not, then I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the consent items not pulled.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, I will now take a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes of September 26, which is item 7B. Moved by Mr. Siegel, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Connor. Any discussion or questions, comments? Not, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of item 7B.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Escobedo,
Abstain.
Mr. Dixon.
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 abstain.
Okay, I'll now take a motion and a second to approve item 7D, the accounts payable report.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Rollins. Questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator call the roll then on the approval of the accounts payable report.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Okay.
Mr. Siegel,
Abstain.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 abstain.
Thank you. I'll now take a motion and a second to approve item 10A, which is the memorandum of understanding for the innovation plan.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Dixon. Any questions or discussion?
Could we just have an explanation from the administration as to what exactly this is?
Sure.
Yeah,
Dr. Jarrett,
this,
or Matt,
this is a one-year MOU that would impact 2 schools in our district, Washington, which was formerly King, and Kishwaukee. Within those schools, 2 grade levels at each school are impacted, and this MOU allows for the school to write plans to implement what was referred to as opportunity culture, which includes a multi-classroom leader and aspiring teachers as far as staffing is concerned, which is different than normal regular elementary schools. It also looks at the plans that the buildings have created around meeting time, coaching time, feedback from peer to peer, utilizing that MCL, and then time with the principal around coaching and peer coaching for better student outcomes as far as academics are concerned, as well as just more adults within those grade levels to intervene both academically, socially, and behaviorally. And it does sunset at the end of this year.
Mr. Rollins?
So this is if you don't mind if I'll ask some questions, this is a pilot program and the fiscal impact is listed as being $26,500. That fiscal impact, as I believe, is probably just limited to the, I don't know if you call it a stipend or a differential for the multi-classroom leaders?
Correct.
So it's my understanding what this is really doing is that at least for these 2 grade levels in 2 schools, the concept is that you would, if you've got a 4-strand building, for instance, you pick one of the teachers in that strand, you designate them as a multi-classroom leader. What you referred to as an aspiring teacher is a new concept that we're trying, where we bring in a student teacher who are usually unpaid, but we believe we've found a way to pay them, so they will be paid as well.
Correct.
Is that, what's the fiscal impact of this,
That's $15,000 for the aspiring teacher for the year-long student teaching experience.
and was not included in the executive summary?
Correct.
So that's $15,000 per class or class level. So if we're doing 2 grade levels, that's $30,000 per building.
Correct.
And then we've got a contract coming up later on with DMG Group under action items, which is also related to the innovation school zones, as I understand it. The concept, that's a consultant that would come in and help us implement that. And the fiscal impact on that was, maybe I'm looking at the wrong one,
9,000.
9,000?
So that is a separate issue. We are in the process of an expanded agreement as part of the upcoming bargaining agreement pending REA and board ratification. We want to start building the concept of what it would look like to add additional site-based budgeting authority to schools and to allow them to innovate around that. So this allows us to get that work started and this would just be a 2-day action planning session. There would be additional fiscal impact depending on what comes out of the action planning, which I will bring before committee and ultimately the board level, depending on the outcomes of that action planning.
So this is a pilot program for 1 year. I assume if the pilot is successful, there'll be a proposal to scale it up for each of these buildings Do we have any estimates on what that will cost when we scale it up?
Depends on the scale. It also would also depend on what Dr. Jarrett referred to as the larger innovation, to see if there are other ways that the buildings could innovate, not just this specific model. And so we'll be keeping track all year long as far as the progress with the building level administrators and teachers as far as the success of this specific type of innovation within the school.
Ms. McCullough?
So, when you say a model, and if you look at the MOU, and you and I have had a conversation, so there won't be anything new between us, but it really doesn't outline a model. It just, what it outlines is that there's this committee of REA and the district to look at these plans submitted by these schools, which I understand are in hand. And as I said to you earlier, I think would have been very helpful to the board members if we were able to see what those were, or at least if they had run through Ed Committee, so we could have had a conversation about what really is innovative. I mean, you listed off some, generic sort of things that you can do, but what is it these schools are going to do? What are the metrics they're going to use to show that their plan was, that doing something different made a difference? The fiscal impact piece, and we had that conversation, I think that needed to be included, although I was told that because we're not paying that to REA members, that's the reason it wasn't part of this. So I understand that, but I don't know, maybe somehow in an administrative summary it could say in there, but the total cost will be when you add in these other things. The $9,000 we're going to pay for 2 days really is just for some high-level leadership and a couple of principals. Maybe that's all DMG feels like, that they, did I get the right initials? Can really move on such a high-level concept, but
I think we're confusing two issues here.
no, okay, but I understand that is the site-based piece that we're looking at for the bigger picture piece. But it is in the innovative summary or administrative summary, something about the this attaching it, or at least binding it to innovation schools, which is why you get that sort of mix up. And I see other board members saying, yeah, I thought it was the same. So
what happened is this was scheduled to be absorbed within the collective bargaining agreement that was scheduled to be ratified, that was not ratified. And so we are now bringing this forward separately so that the work can continue there. So this was going to be included in that. So this is just a complication of a longer than expected bargaining process.
also,
So
we've already approved, the board members, in case you don't know it, we've already approved these aspiring teachers' money, even though we kind of weren't, I don't know that y'all were aware of what we were approving at the time. So they've all been there, and this pilot is already going, and we're 2 months into the school year, and we're getting the MOU now, and my understanding is that too is because of the delay in ratification of the contract. Had it been ratified before the start of school, it would have been captured, but since it was not, we allowed the process to go forward, and it took time then to bring this forward to us. So please be aware that this is already in place. We already have the teacher leaders identified. We can't pay them their stipend until we approve this. And somehow our process, even if our intention is, and this will never be in the same place in the universe again, but I think we need to be more proactive. If we're putting something in place, we can't wait to see if the other part comes through. We need to put it in place, bring the MOU forward. We knew about these schools last year, and all the pieces should be there that we're looking to do. And bring it through an ed committee where we can talk about all the pieces, bring the innovation plans, we can have a deeper conversation so that when we get to the board level, I can tell you, you can either listen to it, come to the committee meeting, listen to it, or we can tell you, Jaime and I, for example, would be able to tell you, we've really done a deep dive into all that. So that would be really helpful, and you and I have agreed that we can do that going forward. And I actually think that it would be a positive if we we have a meeting next Tuesday night here for Ed Committee, if we kind of brought those plans forward and had that conversation. So, thank you.
Mr. Rollins?
I don't have any more questions. I just really have a comment. I think this is a great idea. I think it's innovative. I'm disappointed in how it's being implemented. We know, I think we all at this point know, that there is a distinct difference in the level of teacher experience between our West Side elementary schools and our East Side elementary schools. Some of us have been quietly asking what we're going to do about that for a number of years. And when I first heard about this concept, the multi-classroom leader concept, it was told to me in the context of, well, here's our idea for how we're going to create a better environment for teachers to give them an incentive to work in some of our harder to staff schools where we have higher teacher turnover, lower teacher experience. And so I was a little taken aback when I first heard that it's being implemented in Kishwaukee and King, now Washington. Those are challenged schools. We have lots of challenged schools. They're not our most challenged schools. They don't have our lowest teacher experience levels. Kishwaukee has an 81% teacher retention rate. Ellis has a 68% teacher retention rate. Lewis Lemon has a 77% teacher retention rate. So I guess I've come to the conclusion I just can't ask these questions quietly in the background and hope to get answers. I'm got to start asking them on the floor. What's our plan? If these are not going to be implemented, if this is not going to be implemented in the schools where we have the largest challenges, what is our plan for the schools with the largest challenges? What is our plan for the schools with the lowest teacher experience? And if the explanation is we can't roll this out in those schools because the staff isn't ready, which is the explanation we were given, that sort of seems like a chicken or egg problem to me. The staff in those schools aren't ready because they are junior, high turnover. We have to provide some leadership here. So when and how are we going to do that? I'm not going to vote against this. I think it's a great idea. But I would like the question answered at some point. And I'm just one board member. I'm one of 7 people up here. You can ignore me if you want, unless other board members want to weigh in and ask the same question.
Ms. McCollum?
Well, I'll echo what you have to say. The problem is that we're working with, be really frank, we're working with a union. That's why this is an MOU. And it's volitional. We have to have teachers agree to participate in this pilot program. And so even if we wanted to say Lewis Lemon, which has, what did you say, 78, 77%, how do we, what kind of carrot can we give those teachers to want to participate, other than the fact that hopefully better student achievement, which we as a board all feel is the most important component of the job of this district. And so if we cannot rally the educational professionals to feel like it's the most important and this would make a difference, and what I'm told by just having sat through a lot of bargaining sessions is that if you've got a school with a lot of newbie teachers, they're already struggling, putting in a lot of extra hours just figuring out how to be a teacher for the first few years, and how are they going to be able to do additional programs like this? Because this is part of what we're looking at for, the long term, as Dr. Jarrett spoke a moment ago. We'd like to expand on a larger scale. So how do we motivate our teachers? How do we, as Mr. Escobedo says, how do we get them to feel the urgency? That as each minute, each day, each year goes by, that these students only have a limited amount of time with us, and how do we get the most? How do we get them to perform or to get the most achievement that we can? So I know that we only invited certain schools to even apply for this, but I do know that Ellis was invited. But we have to have the staff willing to participate.
Mr. Connor?
So, long as we're going to talk about stuff on the floor, I've said very little about this, but I will say I think there's some real, if I might say, misinformation. So let me ask one thing. Is Washington a West Side school? Yes, it is. So I think to characterize this as west and east side really distorts the picture. Kishwaukee is one of the poorest, and it's not a high-achieving school, so it is a perfectly acceptable place for this to go. And I resent out loud the fact that it has been distorted in this community and particular places that this is a west side, east side school issue. Kishwaukee is a near east side school, one of the poorest, one of the most crime-ridden. So that school, along with others, deserves attention. So I'm not going to keep quiet on some of this either. I believe in the same things. I believe where there's those inequalities, we absolutely should go after it. But to characterize it like that, I'm sorry, I've had it on that. Those neighborhoods have all kinds of issues. They are deserving of the attention. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to let that one go by without saying something on that.
Mr. Rollins?
Well, just to respond to Mr. Connor, Kishwaukee's actually in my sub-district. I walk that sub-district. You don't have to tell me anything about that sub-district, but I have always taken the position while I've been on this board that we need to look at the entire district and not just at our own sub-districts. So Kishwaukee, according to the Illinois State Report Card, has a percentage of 11.4% that are ready for the next level, which sounds really bad, and is really bad. When you look at Ellis, it's 7.8%. When you look at Lewis Lemon, it's 5%. When you look at McIntosh, it's 6.3%. And I don't know, maybe some of this predates you, Mr. Connor, but we have actually asked in the past on the floor, what are the plans for these schools? What are we going to do for these schools? And I can't remember getting an answer. And, one of the things that I hear about in the community is, why don't you talk about these schools? So to Mrs. McCulloch's question, this has to be voluntary because we mixed up, or we mixed in the multi-classroom leaders with a completely different issue, which was the innovative zones, which requires a longer school day. That's why we had to get voluntary buy-in from the teachers and to reduce, some of the work rules, or to release some of the work rules.
There's no longer day on this.
No, that's inaccurate, Mr. Rollins.
If you read it.
All right. So I'm wrong about that, but then why is it
Mr. Rollins,
voluntary?
we had to add a stipend, and that had to be negotiated.
So you're saying that the REA would not let you add a stipend in schools other than Washington or Kishwaukee?
I'm saying we had to be able to scale this up. First of all, we're creating a new concept, which was something that was brought forth by the administration as a new idea and we spent a long time working with the REA on this idea of visiting schools all across the country to make sure that this was something that could be implemented, doing a lot of research. This has been an 18-month process to get to this point in order to ensure that we didn't just implement something without thinking it through very carefully. We did go with a construct of looking for volunteers that wanted to do this because we felt like a pilot should be based on volunteers. And the idea of hiring an aspiring teacher, which is very, very uncommon in the state of Illinois, is something that is not easy to scale up immediately. So we were able to confidently hire 4 of these aspiring teachers in year 1. We were also in the process of bargaining a contract simultaneously and thought that would be absorbed into the collective bargaining agreement. But I think the larger issue here is I would like to think that we all want the same things here. And one of the things I'm concerned about the tone of the conversation is it's making it sound like the administration is not interested in this and the board is. I think we are all collectively of one voice and of one mind when it comes to the idea of wanting all students to achieve at high levels. We've been very clear about what our vision is as a district. We've been very clear about what our scorecard says. The superintendent is now being held accountable on an annual basis for driving growth. We have an annual scorecard that focuses on 5 areas of that growth. This is one of many strategies that we are focusing on to improve all of our schools. I'm proud of this agreement. I'm proud of the schools that we're serving. I think there's even more to come, potentially, if the collective bargaining agreement is approved. And I am hopeful that this will work well enough that we will want to scale it up. One of the things we have to be really careful of is scaling up so quickly that we make mistakes or invest everything. If you look at some of our efforts with high school redesign as an example, we attempted to start with freshmen first. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in making sure that that there's a scaled approach. So I hope that the tenor of this conversation can change from one where we are talking about us versus them, but a much more unified approach between the board and the administrative team, and that we can continue to focus on our shared goals, not highlighting differences of who told what when about what problem.
Any further comments?
Yes, my last before, which I wasn't done, was to say to Mrs. McCulloch, I guess, when you say, from my standpoint, and this is actually what we should be doing, is saying to the administration, here's a problem. What's your solution?
Anybody over here that still has their light on, has anything else to add?
I mean, I'll just say, number one, there's no disagreement that we should hold it to account that the most needy schools absolutely should have a plan in place. No disagreement with that. I really want to make it clear, the burr in my saddle is that, A, characterizing it as West Side, East Side, I think is truly unhelpful. And I think the second part is that there are some really high needy schools. 11% achievement, I'm sorry, when you compare to 7 and 5%, you're really talking about needy schools. So yes, all of them need a plan, totally agree. I just want to make it clear that they are needy in a lot of ways, and from just me, I think they're an appropriate target, and if we can show this pilot working and have that school be successful, I mean, I think the lessons then would be, can we apply it to others? And if there are more specifics for the other schools, I would agree. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. My issue is the characterization that has gone on in the public, and I think is not helping us to understand we have a lot of needy schools.
Ms. McCulloch?
I would just like to say that I do appreciate the time and effort. I do know that there's been it's the communication, the process of communicating it so that we all were on the same page. So I do appreciate that. I appreciate the concept. And I also want to say, I think I was kind of not real positive about teachers, but I want to give kudos and a shout out to the teachers who stepped up and are willing to pilot the program, because it's not always easy to be on the forefront on that. So thank you, and look forward to the success. And again, thank you too to the people who put a lot of work and time and effort into this plan and into the memorandum. So.
Thank you. I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 10A, the MOU for the Early Adoption Innovation Plan.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We are now at the closed session consent agenda items, including the following: the appointment of Tiffany Thomas as a 10-month assistant principal at Carlson Elementary School, the appointment of Nicole Giovanni as a 12-month early childhood administrator, the appointment of Christina Bagley as a 12-month elementary special education administrator, and the appointment of Andrea Patarala as the 12-month elementary special education administrator. The notice of charges and dismissal of a tenured teacher, Verna Wrench, the HR organization report and addendum, and unless otherwise modified below, the board adopts and accepts the hearing officer's findings and recommendations in the following cases in which students expelled or suspended are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. Student 4103 is expelled for the remainder of this school year and the first semester of next school year. Students 4106 and 4107 are expelled for the remainder of this school year. The expulsion of students 4104 and 4105 are held in abeyance contingent upon an expulsion and abeyance agreement for the remainder of this school year and the first semester of next school year. The expulsion of student 2019 is held in abeyance contingent upon an expulsion and abeyance agreement for the remainder of this school year and through the first trimester of next school year. And the following student EIAs were approved: the 3328, 3332, 3333, 3334, 3335, 3336, 3338, 3339, 3340, and 3341. Is there a motion and a second to approve these closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any items that board members would like to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, then I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the closed session consent items.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo, Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
I think enough's been said for tonight.
Okay, thank you. Committee reports, Mrs. McCullough, Education Committee.
Education Committee has not met since our previous board meeting. Will be here next week, Tuesday, 5:30 p.m. And the agenda will be on board docs, and that must be the 17th, right? There you go.
Okay.
Look forward to seeing you, and if you're not here in person, don't forget, it's always on Channel 20, right?
Mr. Rollins, the Finance Committee report.
Finance Committee has not met and will not meet again until November, first Monday in November, which looks like it's probably November 6th.
Mr. Connor, Operations Committee.
The Operations Committee met, and if I might say so happily, I was out of town at a conference. So our next meeting will be Tuesday, the 7th, and Mr. Siegel ran the meeting, and thank you very much, and he has the report.
Mr. Siegel.
All right, we had a very swift meeting. There were just 3 items on it. The first one was a custodial contract update, and I know everyone is all aflutter to hear the update. There are still some challenges in ramping up Aramark as our custodial service provider. They're still hunting for managers. That's probably one of the biggest sticking points. They have brought on more full-time employees and are using fewer temps, helping them to bring a lot of their costs in line. There is not a contract signed yet, but they are working towards that contract. And if there's been an update, maybe Mr. Schmidt, if he's here, can tell us and say.
He's shaking his head, no
No.
update.
Okay. A primary sticking point on that is concerns that if the minimum wage should rise steeply during the life of the contract, that they should wish to renegotiate or else get stuck losing money just in wages. We've been polling or surveying the principals regarding the cleanliness of the schools. The initial report was from the vast majority of the principals, but it was not an impressive feedback. The second survey showed a little bit of a decline in the perceived quality of the cleanliness, but it also had a significant decline in the number of principals who responded to the survey, and it does look like those that didn't respond kind of helped not to bring up the overall positive responses. We also had a facilities master plan update, and not going to go into all of the details other than to say that for a plan that was this massive and has been moving for so many years, it continues to make really excellent progress. As we move to more and more of these projects getting completed and paid, we're at, if I'm not mistaken, approaching 80% paid, which is pretty fantastic. And then the last item was a life cycle report on flooring and bleachers, which was a really riveting conversation. But it was part of a much larger conversation that showed how far the district is looking into the future to make sure that all of the facilities are maintained, so that this and future boards can budget for it, so that we can be prepared with, if we need to have a tough conversation with the community about what needs to be raised to pay for these. But at least it gives us a plan, and Todd was kind enough to give us a plan clear out to 2043. So we should be pretty well prepared.
Thank you. Okay, we are now on to action items, and our first action item tonight is the intergovernmental agreement with the Rockford Park District for Walker School. We have an open motion. We do have an open motion on the floor. Mr. Connor made the motion, seconded by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion on this item?
Let me just say that there's been some writings lately that have not told the full picture. And let me say yet again, even though this doesn't get reported, that it is the residents of the Walker area that voted overwhelmingly, more than 70%, to take Walker and have the Park District take it over. So this is not the school board going out and arbitrarily doing something. This was a public process with 3 at least public meetings, and the residents of that area voted for it. So I really want to say that. The second thing is, on a personal story, I gave a link to people I work with, and universally, almost everybody said, they like the outside of the building and we're sorry to see it closed. And I know a lot of residents feel that way. And the thing that I'll say is, couldn't agree more why people would feel that way. The fact and the hard fact is, you can't save a building unless you have a viable long-term funding and usage. And that is the thing that any fantasy number like $120,000 to property taxes is just that. It's fantasy. There's no practical plan that's come forward. And even if you have tax credits, the thing I have to ask is, if something was viable before tax credits, what makes it all of a sudden viable for that area? And it's the residents of that area that take the risk. So the people that are suggesting some of this, I suspect they don't live in that area. And so they want residents to take the risk that that building will be funded appropriately over a long period of time. Not just 1 year, not 2 years, but 10 and 20 and 30 years. Because that's what we've found, is that those are the buildings that cause the most problems. So in some ways, I think, I'll just say for me, I understand why this is difficult, and it is in many ways on the outside beautiful, but the costs and everything else associated with it is why it was chosen. And part of the choice was, we said, number one, our issue was education. And we had a year-long process just on the educational part, and this was one of the schools that was chosen. So this is a difficult decision. No matter what the vote is, I want the public to know there's been a lot of heartburn on this, and as much as we got zero credit from anybody writing anything on that topic, I just want to say publicly, there's been a lot of heartburn on this. We have nothing but sympathy for those that really want to keep that building, but in the end, our top priority was education, and the second is the viability of the neighborhood. And that's, for me personally, what motivated me and why I think that this is really the best. And if I might say so, the Park District, I think, has done a really good job in terms of their plans and what they want to do next.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Siegel?
I too experienced a flurry of great ideas that should be done with Walker School in the last couple of weeks since the last board meeting. But I actually had one that was brought up several times that I think is really eminently doable. And I had several people say they would really appreciate having a well-invited open house for people to come by and say goodbye to the building. We have about how many months before we dispose of the building? You know what? I would certainly be happy to entertain any ideas along that line. If somebody from the community or the board or administration has any ideas, as strange as it may seem, this is an opportunity to actually bring people together over something that a lot of people didn't want to see happen.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Now to have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the IGA with Rockwood Park District for Walker School Grounds.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Our second item is the DMG Group Planning Session. This was presented by Dr. Jarrett. Is there a motion and a second to approve this?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion?
Question.
Mr. Escobedo.
Yeah, I guess just in general, I'm interested in knowing what kind of expertise does a consultant bring in that would not be found in town or within our resource pool within the district for this facilitation.
Yeah, I think what the district management group brings is experience in multiple large districts with the idea of building site-based management and really understanding the complexity and some of the unintended consequences. We do have internal capacity with our CFO. Ms. Thorne does have some experience with that in her work in her previous district in Las Vegas. This will bring us about 10 to 12 different districts that have done this work. And so as we build an action plan, I think this is going to help us be really clear about what our intent will be as we consider options to add additional site-based budgeting capacity to our schools.
Then a follow-up, kind of playing devil's advocate here, but if this is a complex work with site-based budgeting, what is the possibility that by doing this, we would be moving, by going to site-based budgeting, we would be moving effort and defocusing our principals and staff from focusing on education and distracting them and doing site-based budgeting?
That's a great question. So I think what it comes down to is when you look at a principal's budget, there are really two discretionary funding sources that a principal has. One is Title I, which we've worked hard to address in our buildings with statewide reform, where we've helped basically 45 of our 46 schools benefit from that. That was a 5-year lobbying effort, and so that in some districts in some schools as much as $600,000 or $700,000. So that is one piece of the puzzle that principals currently control. The other piece of funding they control is a very small Fund 10 amount. So where is the majority of their money? It's in staffing. And so what this work will do will allow us to consider a model where, in order to move the needle on student achievement, to build on a district-wide framework for student support for students, this will take 75 to 80% of the money, which is in a district, is in staffing. When you talk about a building, it's probably much closer to 90 to 95% of the money is in staffing. If you want to move the needle in student achievement, from my opinion, over time, building the capacity of our schools to work collaboratively with the district and with the faculty and staff to come up with more innovative staffing models, I think is one of the best things we can do to increase student achievement.
Any other questions or comments? Ms. McCulloch.
When Dr. Thompson was superintendent years ago and we did a contract, there was a site-based piece in that contract. I mean, it's not the first time the district is really looking at it, but we didn't have the support that we needed to put it in place. It was left to the buildings in large part, and so I do think it's a complex issue for, and you know, I hope we have the capacity in our leadership, because this first round that we're paying for really will bring in a couple of principals, but this really does add to their workload to now, you know, to figure out their budget and how they're. So it didn't work when we didn't do this. So I'm going to support and hope that by bringing some people in to tell us how to do it right and work with us, that we can do a better job this time around.
I would just add that we have some history with this company as well. They did our audit a few years ago on staffing and were very helpful in that area. So, all right, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the DMG contract.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next action item is the Alignment Rockford funding. Is there a motion and a second to approve this?
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Okay, I have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the Alignment Rockford funding.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next item is the National Equity Project Building Leadership for Equity. This is the cultural competency training that was brought up by Mr. Siegel earlier. Is there a motion and a second to approve this?
So moved.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Questions or discussion? None of Mr. Escobedo.
Yeah, so again, don't misunderstand me here. I'm just playing devil's advocate again here, but 175K over 3 years. How will we know, 3, 5, 6 years down the road that this made any impact whatsoever into student achievement? So my question is this 175K, how do we know that this 175K is not better spent, say, tutoring students that are at most need?
Can I take this one?
Yep.
I think I'll let Mr. Zedeker speak to the specifics of the vendor or why we made the decision we did, but the board has made clear for a very long time that increasing the effectiveness of our entire district, working with students from diverse backgrounds is a real high priority. One of the ways we hope to address that is through continued strategies to increase the diversity in terms of gender and race of our teaching force. 75% of teachers in the state of Illinois are Caucasian females. Our teaching force very much reflects state and national averages. So one of the things that we can do in the meantime as we look at our district is we can start with our board, start with me as the superintendent, start with our senior management team, and have a multi-year strategy to, much like rolling out our core values, roll out a strategy to talk about a framework that we can use to talk about how we can build cultural competency. And so I think what you will see if this is successful, Mr. Escobedo, and I think that's exactly the right question to ask, is how will we know if this is, I think we will see benefits to student achievement potentially as this fully rolls out, but we will also see an increased comfort level and capacity in our community to have tough conversations, to meet the needs of all learners from diverse backgrounds, from diverse situations. And I think this framework of all the companies that we studied, we felt like the National Equity Project was the strongest potential partner to do that work. So we're really attempting, after a multi-year journey of looking at Mr. Zedeker and some team members, tried a lot of different vendors. The Harlem School District was kind enough to invite us to participate in some of their work that they're doing locally, and ultimately we settled on this vendor, and we feel really comfortable that this is going to help us as a district, starting with the board and the senior management team, but eventually looking at our entire district to have a common framework to make sure we can meet the needs of all learners. And so at that point, we think that will help us help strengthen our district and ultimately correlate with increased student achievement.
You want to add anything to that, Mr. Zedeker?
I echo Dr. Jarrett with improved student outcomes, but also, tying this work into MTSS and social-emotional as well, and understanding our students and the backgrounds they come from and the environments they come from. And so it allows for skills and the ability to have not only those conversations around race and other difficult topics, but also then to develop, culturally responsive teaching and lessons, and how do we respond and intervene most appropriately.
Okay. Mr. Siegel.
This should largely go without saying, but this group is led by African Americans, which you'd say, well, of course it is. But certainly there would be somebody who out in the community who would say, well, really, how effective is this group going to be at teaching us about cultural diversity? Well, they should be very effective. I think that this company is going to have pretty great credibility, and I think just being able to say we brought in a very credible group and that we're all going to get some education from these people from the board level down, that we can say to the community, we made this investment because the community asked for it, the schools have asked for it, the administration has asked for it, and so has the board, and that we're all
I'll just add
participating.
the teachers as well.
Right.
The REA has been very involved in this
So
process.
I think making this investment in this particular company, it's the right thing to do. And I think it does say very loudly that we are really interested in meeting the diversity needs of the community.
Mr. Dixon?
I think it'd be interesting if you can share some of the time frame of what you and me had conversations. I wish you would share that.
The rollout of the plan?
Mr. Zediker, do you want to talk about the rollout?
So the proposal is for a 3-year rollout at this time. And the thought behind the 3 years is to be very thoughtful and strategic with how we roll this topic out. Because it's sensitive in nature, we also wanted to roll it out with the board members, superintendent, and upper management, so that it's understood through the district and through the community how important it is to all of us to be able to build these skills, to have conversations, to be able to lead with equity. And it's really important for others in the district to see that we are taking the approach, and we will help facilitate as it goes through the next couple of years. I've built a 6-member team that represents schools, different departments, to help facilitate these trainings, and to reach out in the 3rd year of implementation when it is majority classroom teachers and other educators.
Is that what you were looking for, Mr. Dixon, or is it?
Yes, it was the rollout. You're correct.
I can just say that in healthcare, we have been doing cultural competency for a long time. And what I saw in my previous employment was an improvement in our patient satisfaction scores. So there was actually something that we measured that was linked to the cultural competency of our staff and caregivers. So, Ms. McCullough.
What a nice segue, thank you.
Okay.
The one thing, and I had a conversation with Mr. Sediger and Attorney Hoadley about this is that the administration recommends the board approve the proposed project. So we have a proposal before us tonight that we're going to vote on. And then authorize the superintendent to negotiate a contract with the National Equity Project consistent with the attached proposal. And so if we approve this, we don't actually see the contract. And one of my questions that I asked was about the metrics. How are we going to tell that this made a difference? And so I was told that that would be in the contract. They would have more specifics. And so I, as a board member, and I can make a motion, or administration can just agree to do so. They don't have to bring it back for a vote to the board, but if they did, or if you want to bring it through Ed Committee, I think that they did not move on with the larger piece of putting everything together, because until we agree to the proposal and the fact that we're going to bring them in, they didn't want to do, put a lot of extra time into that until we know. So I don't know, Attorney Hoadley, do I need to make a motion, or can administration say we'll just bring it back to you after we have a contract? I mean, because
I think
that's
I could
what we're looking
probably
at, is
bring.
metrics,
I could
right?
probably, once we have it, I could bring it back as part of the superintendent's report and just share the details.
Is that enough? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
The coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the National Equity Project Cultural Competency Training.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're now on to new business, and Mrs. Lawrence is going to present our first two items.
The first recommendation is for Don Johnston, which is our Snap and Read and co-writer. We've used this in our district for several years. Snap and Read provides reading support for students, and co-writer provides written expression and writing support for students. Want me to do the next one too?
Sure.
Unique Learning Systems is our alternative curriculum for our low-incidence classrooms across the district.
Any discussion?
Oh, I just have a question.
Mrs. McCulloch?
So, is the Don Johnson, is it the same that we're using right now? Is it exactly the same as what's in the system? It didn't sound like that in the proposal. It sounded like it was a variant of, or,
There have been updates to it. So co-writer now has a speech-to-text recognition feature, and there's been a couple other upgrades. There's an online app for the co-writer, or for the, Snap and Read, so students can access it anywhere, just on their mobile device.
so, but it's currently in place, and I read through that, we don't have to do anything additional with IT. It's already in, unless we have new computers that we might need to put it on or some.
Correct.
So, until this is approved, they just continue to use the current version, or is the current version, was our time up on that?
Our time has been up, but the company's been very generous with us and have allowed us to continue use.
Okay, I just want to make sure that thank you.
Any other discussion? Not these two items will be presented at our October 24th board meeting for approval. Mr. Schmidt has a real estate purchase item
Yes,
for
this purchase on there for 523 Union Street was previously an eminent domain. We've reached a settlement with the property owner, and you have that there tonight.
Wonderful.
After this one, we have 4 more parcels of houses and 1 business to purchase, and we'll be done.
Very good. Any questions or discussion for Mr. Schmidt? Not, this will come for a vote on our April 24th board meeting. Ms. Beauchamp, third-party vending.
I'll start, and
Okay.
If you have questions, then.
Mrs. Thorne, okay.
What you have before you is a agreement for nutrition services to utilize HPS, which has a membership fee, but in exchange for the small membership fee, we have the potential to have huge savings in our cost of food, as well as it will be more efficient for our staff in how they actually order and process their food orders on a weekly basis. So with that, if you have any specific questions, I'll be happy to have Renee speak to those.
What does HPS stand for? Okay, do we know?
I do not have the answer to that question.
Okay, I'm just curious.
It's part of a larger organization. Med Assets is the parent company of it. How we came to look at this is New Berlin Schools put out an RFP, so this has been competitively bid. And under Illinois state law, for the intergovernmental purchasing, hold on a second. Under the Intergovernmental Cooperation Act, it gives our district the authority to enter into this contract, subscription dues. We have reached out to Tom Bishel, who's our outside attorney, who carefully vetted this. We've also spoken with Attorney Holdley in regards to this, but ultimately it would produce potentially a huge savings to the district in food costs.
Ms. McCulloch.
So, I guess I would like more information. I'm not questioning anything that can save us money, and so they looked at the February 17, what we ordered food orders, and then they said what it would cost if we had gotten it from them, and for that 1 month, it was like $53,000 or something like that. What is our reimbursement from the federal government? I pay federal taxes, so I still want to save money. But just what is our federal reimbursement on our food program?
I'll have Renee answer that question, but it depends whether it's breakfast or whether it's lunch.
I mean, because we're offering it to every student in the district because we got into this program, which are we in year 3 now? 3 of 4? 3 of 5? Thanks, Todd. So
we get reimbursed on a per meal cost.
So what percentage?
Well, I can answer roughly about $3 for every meal that we're at.
But what does it cost us?
We haven't really done an assessment. I would say probably, we're making money. I would say probably about $2.50 maybe a meal.
Okay.
That's a rough estimate.
We can do that? Okay.
We can do what?
We can make money?
We're a nonprofit. We can make money as long as we put it back into the program. And that is what we're doing.
Okay. So this is so this is just to participate in this program. We do a consortium for buying other things in the district. So this is similar, just now with nutrition and food.
Correct. And we currently utilize Gordon Food Services, which is the primary vendor of HPS, which, as my colleague next to me has pointed out, 50 years ago, started out as hospital purchasing services.
That's right. Okay, there you go.
I looked it up, that's what it says.
I actually wondered
That's
about
right.
I wondered about
And so the reasoning as to why we utilized February of 2017 as the date, Renee and her team have been looking at this for quite some time, and when they originally pushed the button to get the information was back in February. At that time, we were amidst impasse negotiations with the nutrition services, and then ultimately had a strike in April, and so this has kind of been pushed off. And so we did not go back and get additional information, but they did utilize our Gordon Food Service invoices from February and compared against what we could actually get from Gordon Food Services under the HPS contracts. We currently have the same vendor, so we would actually get a cost savings in switching under the HPS consortium.
But we don't have a contract with GFS that we're going to purchase all their food from them now that we're going to have to back out of, do we?
No, we have requested an extension. Their contract for food was up at the end of June. Since at that point in the spring, we did not know which way we were going to go, we requested an extension of 90 days with any food vendor, which included Gordon Food Services or Fox is the other company that we utilize.
So when we vote on this, it still will be within that 90-day period of time?
We are just outside of the 90-day window. The 90-day window ended September 30th, and one of the vendors has now indicated that they will not honor the pricing. So that is the sense of urgency in moving this forward.
Okay. Guess I'm wondering why it wasn't double asterisk then.
Typically, the double asterisk raises questions, and so we, as a team, decided that we would not do it in that fashion. Give you the opportunity to fully vet it.
Mr. Connor.
I know there's been a lot of thought on this, and I don't disagree with the consortium idea nor the pricing. The only thing I'd ask is, on an ongoing basis, I'd like some of the details of this to come back to Operations Committee. I know you did a very good job last time talking about fresh food and a number of other items, and I'd like to make sure that there are metrics in place. And I don't think we talked about this last time on the quality of what we're getting, delivery. So all those nice boring stats that all the data nerds like, that's the kind of thing I'd like to see come to ops on this. Because the other thing, the one piece of feedback I will give under this umbrella is I do get some feedback from the community on some of the things that we're serving to the kids. So I really want to make sure, long as we're going to do something like this, let's take a slight pause to have metrics. And I might even suggest, I don't want to spend a lot of extra money, but I do think some kind of 360 or feedback program would be really good, and especially if we're going to essentially a new vendor in that sense, would be a good opportunity to put these in place, and I think the proper venue would be operations. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
Quick question.
Sure.
So this may be slightly unrelated, but since we're on the topic of saving money in food services, one of the things that I've noticed in schools sometimes and irks me a little bit is the waste in food. And just kind of wondering, with new service provider, is there anything in I guess, in the way of serving or that would reduce waste? Is there anything that's being done in terms of waste reduction?
We are looking at, we've changed the menu up from last year because we were not in compliance with our federal regulations. So we have changed the menu, so we're adding more. We're required to serve half a cup of fruit every day. Whether the child wants it or not, we are required to serve it and make sure that they have that on their tray before they leave the line. So that does account for some of the waste. What we're trying to do is mix it up and have choices for students so that if you don't like banana, for instance, there's grapes or some other type of fruit. So hoping that they will take the fruit that they like. So that is one way we are addressing that. We are also trying to educate, and I have looking at hiring a manager of nutrition education, and this person will go out into the field and out in the schools and work in the classrooms and educating and working with students and introducing new food items. When we have something new on the menu, also, we're looking at having samples out for the students to try it first before it's menued so that they know what they're getting. So that's some of what we're trying to accomplish, and just basically educating and working with the students.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think it's good that you keep that in mind as going forward. I understand it's a tough challenge, but at the end of the day, if it's keep that continuous improvement mindset, little by little, hopefully we can reduce and I guess in this case, make more.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Khan.
I forgot this, I apologize. I had it in a note. I think the one word I'd like to leave you with tonight is the word Pop-Tarts.
Okay.
And not in a good way. So just, yeah, it's one word.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It's one word tonight.
I like
Do we serve?
Pop-Tarts.
Yes, we do.
Did you bring some?
I did.
No, okay.
It is one of the pieces of feedback I have received.
Okay.
So, and I forgot to say that because it's the one word that,
And I'd like to address that if I could.
Sure.
The rationale why we do Pop-Tarts right now, with some of our kitchens not being production sites, we do not have the capability of having something warm. And so we're trying to do a variety of foods for some of the students. And as a registered dietitian, I understand where it's coming from, but we also choices, and we have to all foods fit in moderation.
Sure.
So I think we're doing in moderation and trying to encourage students to take other things, but once in a while offer some of those favorites that maybe as adults we don't like, but some of the students do.
Sure.
And they are whole grain.
Okay.
yeah, I'll only reflect the conversation I keep having with a lot of folks, which is really Pop-Tarts for
Okay.
young children. So that's why I say it. I'll just leave you with
Okay,
Pop-Tarts. on that.
thank you. Thank you. This will come for a vote on the 24th then. Dr. Wolf, you are our last item for tonight. Richard Jenkins, Studio Hijinks.
Thank you. How do you feel about Hot Pockets?
Hot Pockets? Okay.
That's my supper tonight.
Yeah.
Last year, we had Mr. Jenkins in with us for professional development on an under $10,000 contract. Teacher surveys said they would like him back. They would also like him to do some arts integration with special education students in the classroom. And so we built a program this year supported fully by our 2 arts grants to do that. 4 days of training and 2 days of in-classroom coaching. The total that we're asking you to authorize us to spend this year is $13,000.
Questions or comments for Dr. Wolf? Mrs. McCullough?
What did they like about him? What did he do that stirred their interest in having him back? And
Sure. So a lot of folks hear arts integration and they get scared off by that. In 2015, it was the first time that the federal government actually allowed arts integration to be used for school improvement purposes and Title I dollars to go towards that, because it engages students and work in the District of Columbia Schools demonstrates that it actually works. Student engagement goes up, student achievement goes up, discipline goes down. And so they liked his ideas, and they said, we'd like to hear more, and we'd actually like to see you do some of this so that we felt more comfortable. We also have our local teaching artists who will be part of it so that they can go in and help the teachers actually implement it.
Okay, any other questions? Not, this will come for a vote on our October 24th board meeting. If there are no further items, agenda, or comments, I will take a motion for us to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, did you have an item?
I just wanted to suggest a couple of updates for a future board meeting.
Okay.
One is the $200,000 of private donations that were supposed to be raised for Kishwaukee. I just haven't heard any update on that, where we're at on that. Just as a reminder, there was a funding gap, and originally the administration had budgeted to build the new school at the Nelson site. We were asked to move it over to Kishwaukee. There was a funding gap of about $200,000. We had some individuals who said that they would raise that money privately, and I just haven't heard any update on where we are on that. So I'd like to suggest an update on that. And then secondly, and this fits in with some of the other conversations today. So tonight, the district does have, or did have, a diversity council, which has been around for maybe 5 years. And in the first few years of that council, we had a number of community leaders, staff members, a couple of board members, who came up with and finalized in July of 2014 a recruitment plan. And I don't know that there's been a really good line of communication from the Diversity Council to the board. I would suggest that we have that recruitment plan presented to the board so that you can take a look at it, and that we get an update from the administration as to where it is on that recruitment plan. It was a pretty detailed recruitment plan. It included listing the people who were responsible for various aspects of it. I looked at it the other day. Unfortunately, I'm not sure there's any names on there that are still around. So it would be a good time to refresh where we're at on that.
Okay. Any other additional items? If not, I'll take a motion for adjournment. Moved by Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Siegel. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 8:35.